Oh hey, wait, don't scroll it, don't skip it, because in this video you will learn some important things. Have you ever heard of violence? If not, well, stay tuned because me and my team will discuss these important things. Before anything else, let us understand the word peace. For you, what is peace? So according to Johann Galtung, peace is the absence of any violence. In direct definition, if there is no war or any conflict, that will be called peace. By the way, Johann Galtung is the principal founder of the discipline of peace and conflict studies. In line with this, his statement was reliable. The definition of peace has been extended. It includes the human rights. And yes, it should be, because we humans have the rights and we deserve that. Also, we should respect the rights of other people in order to maintain a peaceful society. A peaceful society that will lead to a good governance and rule of law. Yes, it will reflect to our politicians. Other than that, peace defines the equality between men and women. As we know in our history, men are the dominant the way it lives, while the role of women is very limited. It seems like the life of women before has no value. But in today's generation, we witness the importance of women, which is very helpful to our current state. Furthermore, peace is a concept of societal friendship and harmony in the absence of hostility and violence. We should leave the word peace. If you want a good society, a peaceful society, live it. So stay tuned because in the next, you will learn about the negative peace and positive peace.
Negative peace is known as the absence of violence and the absence of fear of violence. Regardless of its simplicity, this is a deeply profound definition, where peace had often been thought of as simply the absence of war. Positive peace has an absence of structural violence, where structural violence is a broad definition of peace that incorporates the notion of structural violence. Absence of personal violence can also define negative peace. Positive peace is the attitudes, institutions, and that build and sustain peaceful societies.
Before we go any further, we need to define the word violence. The first thing that comes to mind is a physical confrontation. But violence also includes verbal and emotional attacks. The psychological harm caused by threats, intimidation, and verbal abuse can be as serious as any physical injury.
Good day, everyone. Now, let's proceed to the two perspectives of violence under the understanding violence. According to Johann Galtung, there are two perspectives of violence. First, the narrow concept of violence, and the second one is broader concept of violence. Now, we are going to define what are their differences. If we're going to talk about the broader concept of violence, there are two differences of violence. First is the potential, and the second one is actual. When we're going to talk about the potential, it is something that about vocal, or you're just assuming that violence occurs. But we're going to talk about the actual, it is something that about physical abuse or physical violence. Now, let's proceed to narrow concept of violence. When we're going to talk about narrow concept of violence, violence means somatic incapacitation or deprivation of death alone, such as killing, murder, or etc. It is something that intentionally act. Now we are done discussing about the two perspectives of violence by Johann Galtung. To know more about the two perspectives of violence, which are the narrow concept of violence and the broader concept of violence, let us watch these photos that violence occurs.
Hi, Hi, I'm Yancy Cervantes, and we will talk about the typology of violence, or the DEC triangle, namely the direct violence and the two indirect violence, which are structural violence and the cultural violence. Direct violence. It refers to physical injuries and the infliction of pain that is caused by specific person. It may take the form of verbal and psychological abuse. The simple formula of direct violence is the subject, the action, and the object. Killing and beating in interpersonal situations are the glaring examples of direct violence. Furthermore, direct violence refers to injuries or kills people quickly and dramatically. Structural violence. It refers to a violence that is rooted in social structure. This violence refers to discrimination, social injustice, deprivation, inequality between men and women, and denial of human rights. Structural violence is also the most potent stimulant of behavioral violence in the form of homicides, suicides, mass murders, and wars. The difference between this to direct violence is it is much more widespread and kills far more people by depriving them of satisfaction of their basic needs. Cultural violence is seen as the source of other types of violence through its production of hatred, fear, and suspicion. Religion, ideology, and art may be pointed out as possible sources of cultural violence.
Good day everyone, I am Kimberly Torino, and at this juncture let us talk about the dimensions of violence. So we have 6 distinctions for the dimensions of violence. We have the physical and the psychological violence, the positive and negative approach, the object side violence, the subject side violence, the intended and the unintended violence, and lastly, we have the manifest and the latent violence. So to go deeper, let us discuss about the physical and the psychological violence. Physical violence is defined as the intentional use of physical force with the potential of causing death, disability, injury, or physical harm. So under physical violence, human beings are somatically hurt. So somatically, or from the word somatic, has something to do with our physical to the point of killing. Psychological violence, on the other hand, are any activities that decreases mental potentialities, and that includes lies, brainwashing, indoctrinations, and threats. So the difference between physical violence and the psychological violence is that physical violence has something to do somatically or our physical being, while psychological violence on the other hand has something to do with inflicting pain mentally. Moving on to the second distinction of the dimensions of violence, we have the negative approach and the positive approach. So in the negative approach, one can be influenced through punishing him when he does what the influencers considered wrong. On the positive approach, this has something to do with bribes or the concept of reward. Rewarding someone when he does in accordance to the will of the influencer. The third dimension is concerned with object side violence, and this is being manifested when a person or group of nation is displaying the act of physical violence, whether by throwing stones or testing nuclear weapons. Though there may not be violence present in a sense that anyone is hurt, but there is nevertheless the threat of physical violence and the indirect effect of mental violence. The fourth one is the subject side violence. Based on the subject side, individuals may be killed or hurt during both direct and indirect violence. Number 5. The intended and unintended violence. Some violence is and can be intended. Other violences may happen even when not intended, and the concept of guilt is decided based on the intention. Lastly, we have the manifest and the latent violence. In this part, we are talking about the violences that is visible and invisible. So in the illustration, you can see a tree. The leaves and the branches of the tree represented the manifest violence. The roots, however, represented the latent violence or the violences that is not openly or directly recognized.
So alright, we hope you learned something from this video. So would you rather choose violence over peace or peace over violence? choose wisely.
Stop violence, promote peace.